are you so angry?
Morning YouTube, Tired Metalhead Weatherman here. Well, I don't know if you saw the preview or not, probably did. Well, it's going to be busy. So, buckle your seatbelts. It's going to be a long video. Let's go ahead and get into it. So, we have an enhanced risk for today, and then 4 slight risk in a row after that, which is absolutely insane. We're going to mainly start by talking about today's risk, enhanced risk, and several marginal risk here. We have chances of severe weather over here towards the western high plains and maybe even the southern plains here, towards the northern plains and northern states here, and over towards the eastern fringes of the northeastern fringes of the Rockies here. So main threat with any of these areas is going to be more so wind, especially with our enhanced risk. This is a wind-driven enhanced risk, by the way. And then also there's a 15% hail threat with our enhanced risk as well. 5% areas for the hail over towards our marginal risk. And as far as the tornado threat is concerned, only our enhanced risk is an area of interest. I do think that there could be a 5% area that develops over towards central Kentucky and maybe even towards the tri-state lines between Kentucky, Indiana, and Ohio. So this would include Cincinnati. Definitely be on the lookout for that. A little later this afternoon is when we will be most likely to see the upgrade. We look at day 2, pretty similar deal here. It's not an enhanced risk, but we have a bimodal slight risk here. We have over here, I cannot speak. We have Montana in the action now, even over towards Billings and Sheridan. We also have just outside of Rapid City here in South Dakota, Pierre and Aberdeen, you are in it. And then also we have to look over towards central Minnesota here for a slight risk here. Damaging winds and hail are the main threat with this setup. Then also we see Philly all the way down into Columbia, almost even towards the Georgia-Columbia border here. There's also a slight risk in effect. So basically we also have to include Baltimore, DC, Richmond, Virginia Beach, Raleigh, Charlotte, and others in this severe weather threat for tomorrow. This is July 3rd, by the way. But also the marginal risk even stretches all the way up north of Boston here. And then we can even look at places like Wilmington, Charleston, Atlanta, Columbus, Birmingham, Tuscaloosa, Jackson, Mississippi, Greenville, Memphis, and others. So also for the northern risk, Minneapolis, the Twin Cities, Duluth, Grand Forks, Fargo, Bismarck, and others. We have Jackson, Pocatello in Colorado and Wyoming and Idaho even, which is weird to say. I don't really associate severe weather as much with Idaho, but it can happen the days, and tomorrow could be one of those instances. As far as the threats are concerned, tornado threat is still 2%. Gonna be looking at the models in this video to examine that one and see if there's any chance for an upgrade. I'm kind of leaning a little bit more towards no from what I saw previously, but we'll have to see what happens. Then over towards Billings and other areas over towards the north. Like I said before, main threats with both of these modes are going to be wind and hail. So we go to day 3. We're out of the hazard type range. We're more so just going to be looking at what the probability will be for severe weather. Of course, it's highest over here, and this is, by the way, the 4th of July. Happy Independence Day to those of you that celebrate. Not everybody on this channel is from here, by the way, so just want to make sure I had that clarified. But also, severe weather threat tomorrow is a little bit more widespread and a little bit more impactful as far as population is concerned. Because now we're getting into parts of Wisconsin here. We have the Twin Cities now in the slight risk. We have La Crosse in that slight risk as well. Sioux Falls is in there. Omaha, Lincoln, Des Moines, you are just outside of that slight risk. Then we have McCook, Colby, Cheyenne, Wyoming, and now we have Denver getting back into the action here. Also have to keep an eye on this marginal risk over here towards Mid-Atlantic and the southeast. Stretches from just south of Philly again all the way back towards the Ozarks here, Louisiana and Arkansas as well. So basically a good chunk of Mississippi here, Greenville, Jackson, you guys are in there. Then Birmingham, Tuscaloosa, you guys are in there again. Atlanta, you are in this, as well as Columbus. Charleston, you're in there too. Charlotte, Wilmington, Columbia, Raleigh, and many others. We go to day 4, and this is where the madness only continues. To have this much confidence this far out in July, nonetheless, is pretty notable, to say the least. But anyway, looking at day 4, we're now looking at Green Bay getting into the action, as well as Milwaukee. Vince might be out chasing that one. Then we have Chicago, Peoria, Springfield, Hannibal, Jefferson City, St. Louis back in the action here, Kansas City, Springfield, and even Des Moines, Iowa. Very familiar areas from the last few weeks. We need the rainfall here, but the severe weather we could probably go without. And then also the worry becomes more so over time that we are getting this rain a little bit too fast. So the thought of flooding has to come into mind here, because the flood threat only increases with more rain that you get here. That being said, also we have our secondary slight risk, which stretches from Denver, Colorado, all the way down into the Oklahoma, Texas panhandles here, and then over towards a very familiar area for me, Roswell, New Mexico. I remember doing a lot of streams over here this year, so to see them back into play, not really a fan of that. That being said, here, that is day 4. Here's day 5, and we're seeing a repeat at this point now. So Garden City, Liberal, Woodward, Amarillo, Pueblo, Colby, Denver, Cheyenne, and just to the east of Casper here, we could be back in play once again. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at the models here and go on from that point. Alright, so now we're going to take a look at the 200 millibar here. This is towards jet airliner cruising altitude, but this is often a very telling area as far as severe weather is concerned. We do see a little area of interest over here by 3 o'clock Eastern time, and this is when I think storms will start to really ramp up here. By the time we get towards about, say, somewhere between 5 and 7 o'clock is when these storms will probably be at their peak before starting to dissipate a little bit. Seen a few soundings over here. We'll take a look at one real quick. We do get a couple of torus soundings here or there. This, of course, is a different model that I'm looking at. This is RAP. It says it's a longer range and also a model that looks up a little higher into the atmosphere, which is good. But nonetheless, here do see potential for maybe a tornado developing here. The D-cape is a little bit low, so this is a little bit more ideal. We have to watch out for the potential of a supercell, although I'm not seeing anything super duper impressive on here. Lapse rates are low. Lift index is decent, but not much beyond that. And then also looking at the low level wind profile, nothing really jumps out at me, so to speak. So there's some good news to be had there. Do think this will mainly be mostly a linear type event, but we do have to watch on the south side of those linear modes, whether it be just a line segment, squall line, or MCS even, which I don't even think it'll be an MCS, to be honest. If it does, it's not going to be anything crazy like what we've seen. So that's what we have going on there. And then when we go over to the HRRR here, I have a sounding up from earlier, shouldn't have had that up. We're looking at all levels of the atmosphere. We'll start out with 500, going all the way into the early afternoon here. Things get a little bit more impressive here, but as we get later into the evening, things kind of fall apart at this level of the atmosphere. It's really towards the low level where things really begin to ramp up here. Going all the way into 3 o'clock hour here. Look at how strong the mid-level gets here. It's about 4 o'clock. We're looking relatively impressive here from the looks of it. And on the edge of this, we have a marginal severe threat here. We have pretty low helicity here, but storms are already popping off this area, so the cape starts to drop off. Hence also why we have that little bit of contamination. But nonetheless, as far as the hodiograph is concerned, nothing to be worried about there. A lot of the energy's gone by this point. You really have to look ahead of the line of storms in order to really get a decent sounding here. It's an interesting process on how all that works. I just love nerding out sometimes when it comes to looking at these. Nonetheless, though, Let's go ahead and take a look at the low levels here, and I think that's going to be the really telling point on which areas I think could have the highest chance of seeing a tornado. Still not a guarantee that we will see them, but look at this little area right here. This is the area that interests me the most, and this is over towards 3 o'clock hour. There we go, marginal tornado sounding. It's a good sounding. We have Cape that's about 2,300 joules per kilogram. The D Cape is a little bit low for damaging wind potential, and there's not super high lapse rates here. We're looking at lapse rates at about maybe 6 to maybe 7 at best. But nonetheless here, we do get a little bit of low to mid-level shear here, so it is something that's worth watching nonetheless. So this is heading into 21Z. We move this a little bit further forward. That low-level jet increases, but we'll start to lose the instability, and that's the key factor in all of this. You can have shear, you can have moisture, but if you don't have any sort of instability, you aren't going to really have any storms here. So let's go ahead and take a look at said instability. This is looking at the mixed layer Cape. By lunchtime is when the Cape will be at its highest, which will be at about maybe 3,000. Could even see a couple of 4,000 joule per kilogram areas here. But click on that sounding, you're going to probably see something more along the lines of this. Tor sounding. First storms could fire early in the day. Surface Cape is actually always going to be higher than mixed layer, but we're seeing up to about 4,000 here. Low level shear, though, not that impressive. It's really the timing that's key for having the bigger tornado events, which is why I'm really confident that we're not going to see a major one. Not to say that that can't happen, though. Cape does persist for a while throughout the day here, especially as we get towards 5, 6 o'clock. Once we get towards about 7, 8 o'clock, things start to quiet down a bit more. Like I said, lapse rates aren't very impressive, so there's nothing to really worry about there. Last thing to really look at for this forecast will be the composite reflectivity. We're going to zoom in actually a little bit here, get a little bit more up close and personal with this. So now that we're looking on reflectivity here, ads are popping up because I've been signed out of pivotal weather, which is crazy. We get towards about 19 to 20 Z here. Storms start to fire. Like I said, most of these are going to be in line segments. We could see a couple of supercells here. It's kind of messy. It's kind of a messy convective mode here, but nonetheless, though, have to be on the lookout for a few severe storms, even over towards Tennessee. Like I said, mostly going to be seeing an east-northeast type component as far as motion is concerned. And like I said, anywhere on the south side of these line segments, I would be on the lookout for maybe a quick spin-up tornado, if anything, especially over towards central Mississippi, this area right here. So nonetheless here, the setup for today is notable, something to keep an extra close eye on. I don't expect widespread severe, but it could be interesting. I'm going to go live and check this out, see what happens here. If it's a pretty chill stream, then feel free to come in and talk on chat. We'll just chat it up. If it's more serious, we'll focus more on the weather. Nonetheless, though, let's go ahead and take a look down the line here. We're starting out with the 200 millibars. We're actually going to the GFS this time. GFS is a really good model for the medium to long range here. So here's our setup for today, passing through. Once we get into tomorrow, it's a pretty similar deal. We get a little bit stronger of a we get a little bit stronger of a maximum over here, although I wouldn't really call this a true maximum because we would be looking at about 100 knots for that, or jet streak, so to speak. But here's the setup coming into play for the 4th on Tuesday here, and this is why I'm slightly more concerned about severe weather over here. Right over towards the upper levels, there's a good bit of convergence and divergence here, but overall, as far as the look, wow, what in the world is this? Low level winds look a little crazy, but they look very weak, thankfully, and that's the reason why I'm not super duper concerned about a tornado threat here. But conditions are favorable enough to produce severe weather. Still not very sold on the hail threat as of right now. I think that's why we're keeping marginal risk as a hazard type right now. Of course, these models update every 6 hours, so you constantly have to check these for any sort of changes here. Over towards the southeast, Not really worried too much in the way of severe weather towards the, based off the upper level map here. Not really a whole lot to go off of here. And then over the next few days, we start to see somewhat more classic type setups, especially towards Thursday and Friday, and that's what I'm going to be watching a little bit more closely. And then as time goes on here, I do think that there's going to be a much more robust setup over towards the Ohio Valley as we head towards the 10th and the 11th as of right now. We'll have to see how moisture returns and other things go, but this is a very interesting look here. Not going to get too excited and look into the 500 millibars and below. I think where we are, that levels that we're looking at now are sufficient enough at the moment. I don't want to make this an hour-long video either. That being said here, taking a look at the 500, pretty telling as to what could lie ahead here. Really think worst of the weather is going to be more so to the south of Minnesota here. Marginal severe. It's an interesting bit of contamination there. Probably looking into a storm at this point, so there is that to deal with. But nonetheless, though, as we continue to go forward here, heading into Wednesday, parameters do look like they begin to become more favorable as we go later into the week here. No surprises there. Usually if you see it at 200, it often does translate into 500 millibars as well. It looks a little bit more robust as we head towards the 13th here, and then after that it looks like things might really start to get active from this point. So again, brace yourselves, especially over towards this part of the world in particular. So I think there's going to be a little bit more active weather as we go through the month of July here, especially as a new trough looks like it tries to set itself up here. You can kind of see it based off this little arch here. So now that we've looked at that, let's go ahead and actually take a look at the moisture returns real quick, if this will load. Okay, so this is the time frame right here. This is towards Sunday. Looking at today's severe setup, pretty high numbers as far as moisture return is concerned. Widespread 60s and 70s, so more than sufficient enough moisture return for severe weather. But as we look down the line from the 3rd into the 4th here, where it looks like we even start to get a little bit of corn sweat into play here. Might get some perspiration from the crops out here, and that's what corn sweat ends up being. Gets carried up aloft into the atmosphere, and it creates a good moisture return for a more favorable environment for severe weather. Like I said, eventually whenever we can get a slowdown, I'll actually talk about just what the heck corn sweat is. As we look towards Wednesday, the moisture return continues, and I think this actually might partially be from the Gulf itself here. I think that's partially due to the high pressure that we have over here towards the southeast. It's hanging around. It's not it's a weak high pressure area, so we're still getting storms to fire, but it's not allowing for any sort of troughs to dig any further. But basically we have this clockwise flow here, and this is a very broad area. Really, I would say this would do more justice here. But we're moving in a clockwise motion here, and it's drawing that Gulf of Mexico moisture further up to the north here. So this is going to increase weather activity over towards this region in particular. It's good news and bad news, because these guys have been kind of suffering with a little bit of a dry spell here. Some even getting into drought. But the only issue is increasing threat of severe weather, not to mention if we get too much of this too quickly, we can also deal with flooding here. So definitely something to keep watch of. So as we continue to head forward here, looks a lot like we're going to still be pretty active. Some of the moisture returns for the Western Plains setups, it's still sufficient, but it's not as crazy. Maybe I'm also comparing this to the fact that I'm looking more so at the 70s instead of the 60s. When you get to the 60-degree dew point range, it's more than sufficient enough for severe weather. Of course, human tendency will end up drawing your eyes to the brighter colors or the more vivid colors, which in this case will be purple. Nonetheless, though, there are sufficient moisture noses that make their way out towards the west here. This is what we would call a moisture nose here, right where you can see that little bit of a surge here. Doesn't mean you're going to get the maximum dew points necessarily, but you do see an increase here. And if you end up getting that against a dry boundary like this right here, you can often get some, you can also get a little bit of a flash point there too. As time goes on, continue to see a crazy bit of moisture return, and all the way into the 17th here, we're already seeing some pretty crazy moisture returns, especially as the pattern gets more active. So July might be doing some weird stuff too, just like June did. So just keep an eye on that. This is the deepest dive that we've taken into June so far, and you can probably anticipate more to come. That being said, here, let's wrap this up by taking a look at the precip type here, as I'm continuing to fight with ads here. It's crazy because I'm signed into Pivotal Plus, but I guess after a while you get locked out. Anyway, here's today's severe weather, then tomorrow, then here comes Tuesday's severe weather. This is later into the evening here. Just making sure you guys get a good look at these times here. This will be around the times where the eastern half of the country and the central part of the country would start to shoot off fireworks here. And then later into the evening, a little bit further off to the west, is when you would see your fireworks going. Mainly it's towards the eastern half of the country where most of the action is going to be. This heading into the 5th here. A little bit quieter on the setup here, but also the time frame's a little bit later. Could see a few storms here. See widespread thunderstorms across the southeast. Then as we continue to go forward here, southeast becomes more active. Just going to continue to run this forward here. Pretty much checks out from what we were already looking at with the wind data here and the moisture return. So as time goes on, we start to see that trough begin to come into play here as a ridge starts to build out west, and the storm track begins to change a bit. So these low pressure areas here that we're seeing, these little L's, especially the ones that get more isobars. The isobars are I can't remember the other name, contours around them. Those are going to have to be watched a little bit closer because those would have a greater chance of severe weather. But that's all I got for you guys on this video. If you enjoyed it, you know what to do. Hit that like button, smash that subscribe button. Also make sure you are getting that bell on so that way you can get notified of every video, every stream. We're getting close to 500 subs here. We're 60 away right now. Really appreciate you guys being here, and I can't wait for what's next. But till probably this afternoon today, this has been Ty, Metalhead Weatherman. I will see you guys later. Have a nice Sunday and take care.